All right. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the first of many videos that we're going to be doing with our good friend and brilliant musician and arranger, Dave Marriott. This is the first one. It's on a Friday at a weird time, whatever. It'll be fine. But we mentioned this, I think, last month when we had Dave as a guest, is we're going to be doing a series that covers elements of arranging from many different angles and functionalities, and why is arranging important and all that kind of good stuff. So this is intended to be interactive. So if you're watching us and joining us in real time, great. If you're watching after the fact, that's totally fine too. That's what it's meant for. And again, it's not anything that you have to sign up for. It's just free and open information for everybody as part of our ongoing season material that we do with the Kareem Kandi World Orchestra. And what else do I want to say? Of course, always, thank you to our sponsors, Ted Brown Music, Rick Gray from Edward Jones, Titus Will Cars, KNKX, Tacoma Creates, and everyone that comes out to shows and donates and all that kind of stuff. Thank you for your support, and that makes all this kind of content possible and free for everybody. So thank you. So David, we kind of talked about this. Number one, welcome back. Thank you for being here. Always a pleasure.
Yeah, great to be here.
Yeah. We talked a little bit briefly about the series and what we're going to be doing. So can we just talk about, for those that have no idea what the hell we're talking about here, what is arranging and why is it important?
Yeah, well, I mean, and again, today our topic is really more about the composition side of things, but arranging, I think, is sort of, the distinguishing factor there is how do you take your composition that maybe is more in like a fake book form, it's a melody and chords, or a sketch idea, and how do you delineate who does what in the ensemble? I think that's really what arranging is. Whether that's writing out an arrangement to sort of, have parts for everybody, or if it's something just as simple as, okay, trombone, you play the melody, saxophone, improvise a background, and that in and of itself is arranging on some level. It's certainly more abstract and not what we think of as what arrangers do. I think when we think of the great arrangers, Gil Evans, I think, certainly comes to mind, and not somebody who is as associated with composition as they are with arranging. A lot of the greats that we think of in the modern big band era from the 1950s forward weren't guys that were heavy composers as much as we think of the arrangements, especially when it's we're talking about Stan Kenton and we're talking about Buddy Rich and those kinds of bands where it wasn't so much about the original compositions of band members. It was the arrangements of pop hits in some cases, when
for example, Frank Sinatra and Nelson Riddle. Those are very famous.
Absolutely.
Everyone always says Frank Sinatra. Well, it's like those things wouldn't have sounded as great as they would have without the arrangement,
Definitely. I mean, I think, could you name a composition by Nelson Riddle? Probably not. I don't think anybody could do that. And there are some out there. There are not many, but there's a few out there. I think of somebody like Quincy Jones who started as a composer or arranger for Lionel Hampton and then his own big band, but then that transitions into the pop music world, and you think about the quote unquote arrangement of Michael Jackson's Thriller and all the tunes on that record. That's what his job was to do, right? Is arrange the track, decide who's going to do what. Yeah, the melody is still the melody. That's not going to change. The harmonic thing is not going to change, although maybe the arranger adds a little bit to those ideas. But really it's about how do I take this song and make it into what it needs to be for the set ensemble. I think, we generally think of arrangers as writing for larger ensembles because smaller ensembles don't necessarily need all of that, right? You don't arrange stuff for your trio very often. And if you do, it's the abstract arrangement kind of talk that we're talking about. Right. If it's for maybe the things that I'm doing for you, string quartet with jazz quartet, those string players need direction and parts in an explicit kind of way. So as an arranger, I'm not changing your melody, I'm not changing your chord changes, I'm not changing the form of the solos. I'm at least I'm trying not to do those things and keep the integrity of what you did as the composer, But also add my voice as an arranger. The way I arrange it might be different than the way Bill Holman arrange it is different than the way Oliver Nelson arranges it, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I was gonna say, and for people that are like, this is all brand new, I have no idea what they're talking about. I would say maybe just go on YouTube and check out, type in "summertime" and listen to like 10 different versions of "Summertime." They're gonna be
yes,
totally different and different
yes,
spins of ways of dressing up the song,
absolutely,
and all these different devices. So, I mean, these are things that we're going to be discussing over the course of this from lots of different angles. I guess another good example too. I mean, for you and I, of course, we've had some experience doing this for many, many years, and we a lot of the terminology and things, it's not a far out concept, but for people that have no idea, like maybe another good example would be take like the original version of Herbie Hancock's Watermelon Man that he did in the 1960s on that album Taken Off, and then listen to his version from the Headhunters album, much later. That vastly different, same tune but
absolutely.
totally different takes on it,
And especially in the jazz world where, our recorded history goes back to 1917, you
Yeah,
can trace some of those early tunes over 100 years of recorded jazz performances and hear, different takes on the same song. And, again, I think that's the thing that we, particularly in the jazz world, differentiate from the pop world or the commercial music world to a certain degree is that, you know, these aren't covers.
right,
When I hear the word cover, my goal is to recreate the original. If I'm going to do a cover of Michael Jackson's Beat It, the goal is to play it like the record and sound like the record and play the notes on the record. Uh, that's not what an arranger is doing per
right,
se. Arranger is kind of reinventing a song for a new scenario. And maybe that means that the vibe and the feel changes. Maybe it goes from being a pop sounding tune to a Latin sounding tune. Maybe it goes from being a swing feel to a funk feel. Maybe, those are things that an arranger certainly might make a choice to do, but that's deep. That's the original has already been established at that point, right?
yeah,
It's not in the case of like the compositions that I'm doing for you, for example, you don't have a concrete recording of those tunes. You've played
right,
them once on a live stream and then it went in a folder. And
yep,
so even from that, there's not this is how it was established and now I can add window dressing to it. I have a
yeah,
lot more freedom because
yeah,
number one, there was not even piano on those performances. So
yeah,
I've got a really open palette in which to add to it as the arranger and make some decisions about who's going to do what.
yeah,
And also I can help formalize the concept of the song as it is established, right? In
yeah,
the way that what Quincy Jones does for that record when Thriller comes out. Now, there was various iterations of that song over, probably many months to
yeah,
get to the place of where it finally ends up.
right,
But I think the thing that we want to talk about today, and you can add the video to the stream anytime you want,
sure,
is sort of how do you get started with any of this stuff, and particularly with, I think composing and arranging go hand in hand.
yeah,
It's that idea that when you're an arranger, you're composing a whole bunch of other stuff that isn't the main melody and the main harmony. But you're still composing tons of other stuff, right? You're
right,
composing backgrounds and accompaniments and interludes and introductions and outros and all kinds of additional content to the performance of the tune. And again, the larger the ensemble, the more you're having to do that with,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
If you think of like the 1812 overture, Tchaikovsky's 1812 overture, it's a simple melody, right? Right?
yeah,
That's not the arrangement, that's the composition part,
right,
right? The arrangement is the trumpets echoing and all the timpani stuff, and that's, we in the classical world we would call that orchestration because it's happening simultaneously with the composition.
yeah,
But that's not the same thing, right? In a lot of ways, right?
yeah,
We that's a whole orchestration is a whole kind of other discussion and sort of an extension of arranging if you're composing and arranging as one process, which
Right.
oftentimes you are, right?
Yeah. Well, and it's I use the analogy to people. It's like, if you're baking cookies, you could just bake cookies, which are great in and of themselves. But if you like take the time to like wrap them up, put paper on it and a bow and a little card and personalize it and all that kind of stuff. Well, now we're talking that's more like you have you go to a club, maybe a band plays the melody, they improvise, play the melody, done. Okay. Well, what about having an introduction and then an interlude, the end of the melody, soloist, interlude, shout, chorus, all this stuff. Well, and a
Yeah.
good examples. I mean, to me, and I'm not, of course, like an authority, but I have certain opinions about music and how I like to play it. But like groups like Christian McBride's band, or going back, Oscar Peterson's trio, Ray Brown's
Yeah.
trio, Jeff Hamilton's band, Joshua Redmond's groups. Those are groups that I just for my own reasons look to because they're doing, or Roy Hargrove, same kind of thing.
Yeah.
And they certainly would do, just play a melody, improvise, and play a melody again. But they certainly had other things that there was differentiation. There was a mix of those things. And I think that's when we listen to bands, even if we don't know what we're listening to, those things grab us. So anyways, I don't want to eat up all the time. I want you to
and just to follow up on that too, I think, a lot of people, bebop, I think, is a great example. The bebop era, let's say 1945 to 55. I think a lot of people, their concept of what bebop is goes away, and because they get lost in it's just a bunch of soloing.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, that's not what it was.
Right.
That's what it became, and that's what our modern watered down version of what people say when they do bebop is. It sounds like a jam session. It's just everybody playing a pretty scruffy head and then long solos that don't relate, and then a head out. But that's not what those guys did. That's not what Bird and Diz did. Those dudes had intros and outros and interludes between the solos. I mean, Night in Tunisia is a classic for a reason. It has all of those little pieces and arranged portions to make it interesting, to keep you from going, more solos, right? And that has largely been forgotten, and not continued to be, part of the education that that young musicians get when it comes to playing what bebop is. But again, yes, let's get us back to our topic of discussion for today, which is
but before while you're doing this, things that came to mind. I mean, Amban Jamal's trio, for people that want to investigate what we're talking about, just as an example, you can hear a lot of those things, how to do a lot with a little, and arrangements. And also, speaking of Bird and Diz, there's a really great live recording of them doing it's a radio broadcast, and I think they're doing Blue and Boogie, but they have all these things. There's the introduction, there's the solos, and then they do these little shout courses in.
When we talk arrangement, I'll give you a list. I have a list of like 100 recordings of great small group arranging from the 1920s all the way to the present. And again, that's part of what is important to understand about why those bands, the Horace Silver quintets, the Woody Shaw quintets, you name it, why these bands were significant is largely because of the way they performed the songs, not the compositions themselves, the arrangements of the songs.
Cool. Well, let me add the thing to the stream here, and let's get rolling.
Great.
And again, I'll say, if anybody has questions in real time, just put them in the comments. Yes, jazz cookies, right? If you have questions, let us know. And if it's after the fact, put them in the comments too, and we'll do our best to get to them. And if for some reason you don't hear from us, we're pretty easy to find online. Just blow up our phones and emails. We will get back to you, but have some patience with us.
Yeah, I've got my contact stuff in the presentation at the end. So
awesome, perfect. All right, here we go. This should work.
Yeah, great.
Awesome.
And I think it should be, let's see, is it playing? Yeah, great. So this is our sort of analogy for today, seeds and seedlings. The idea that there are some things that you can do to begin composing that I think of as like starting from nothing, which is, when you think of planting a seed, there's no flower in the ground. You plant the seed, it starts to grow. You have your flower. A seedling is something that kind of is already a little bit kind of getting you there, right? Like if you go to the plant store and you get seedlings for whatever it is you're going to grow, it's already sprouted out of the ground. There's already a little bit of push towards the final result. Okay. Now, that said, I've kind of broken down these ways of starting into these sort of two categories. Seeds being things that mean you're starting with a blank piece of paper and you're writing things down from zero. And these are things that obviously are the focus of your composition. Your melody, your harmony, and your rhythm. And you can start with any one of these three things. We're going to get into more detail with each one of them. But obviously, anything weak here is going to equal a weak composition, right? If your melody is weak, your song will be weak. I think of lots of modern pop music where the melody, if you get rid of the words and all the window dressing, the melody is just da 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 da. Like it couldn't be more boring on many levels, right?
Yeah.
Rhythmically and melodically. So focusing on any one of these three things as you put pencil to paper for the first time is your best bet to creating good music. And again, we will delve into each of these three things here in a moment. Now, when it comes to seedlings, I think of these are things that sort of help to get us down the pike towards doing these other things, something that's more fully formed. But they don't really give us details. They give us more abstract ways of getting closer. Again, like a seedling does, it gets us closer to the final result, but it doesn't. We still don't get pen to paper when it comes to musical ideas. And the things that kind of fall into this category that I think of a form that if you might decide that you want a specific kind of form for your song, the concept behind it, and we'll deal a little bit later about what I mean by concept versus purpose, because I think these are two different kinds of things. And certainly something simple like a title can also be a really helpful focusing factor. So let's dive into at least a discussion of melody creation, because I think it's the thing that we think of most importantly when we're talking about composing, right? When I think of a song, a classic song, let's think of the song Mary Had a Little Lamb, a song I think everybody listening probably knows and can picture in their head and can sing in their head. Or maybe it's the birthday song. But either way, we're not ever thinking about the harmony of these songs, right? Even as musicians, I have a hard time thinking of the harmony of those songs while I'm playing them. I'm really thinking about the melody and how whatever I'm going to play just relates to that. Um, it is the thing that defines your composition more than anything else. So the more time you invest in a strong, convincing melody, the better your composition will be. Um, Reasons to start with the melody, and again, most of these things I'm addressing and starting them as a singular point of entry, the melody as a singular point, the rhythm, the harmony, etc. Because every time you make a choice, it sort of starts to take some options off the table, right? The minute you say to yourself, I want to make a happy song. Well, it's probably not going to have a lot of really strong minor chords then, right? If you want it to be happy, you probably don't want it to be slow either, right?
Yeah.
Um, so in this particular case, the minute you start making notes, making melody note choices, this opens the door and also constricts your options for the harmony, right? If I choose, let's say, the notes C, E, and G for my melody, I probably am not going to have a chord with an E flat in it. My harmony is probably not going to be E flat major or C minor or A flat major. It could be, but it's probably unlikely, especially if our we're dealing with popular music or song forms that are at least not too far outside of our normal ears and what we expect to hear.
Yeah.
I think also it's important that if you're interested in starting with just melody and pitches, that it doesn't need to have rhythm. That rhythm of your melody can come later, right? A convincing melody can, Mary Had a Little Lamb could have been da 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 da, right? That's a different rhythm to the same melody. We haven't even added any notes. It is literally the same melody with a new rhythm. those decisions could have been made differently by the composer, certainly. So it doesn't have to be set in stone when you go to write it down. And in fact, I generally tend to compose my melodies without rhythm first, at the very least with a sense of phrasing, like this is an idea, and then this is an idea, and whether that's 3 beat bars or a 4/4 bar or 2/4/4 bars, that can be decided later, right? I at least have the sense that this is, if I were singing it, this is how it would be phrased, and therefore it kind of needs to occupy a certain amount of space. Now, beyond that, I don't really worry about anything else. If my melody is strong, I know that's the thing that everybody is focusing on as a listener, right? It will always be the strongest point of focus in the music. So you really want to spend the most amount of time developing your melody. And again, a weak melody is boring, right? It's we there's nothing wrong with having boring music if that's your intent.
Yeah.
But I think most of us are interested in, especially in the jazz world, in the context that Kareem and I live in most of the time, with creating music that has drama, that has contrast, that has dynamism, that has um, uh, ups and downs, it has tension and release. It needs all of these things. And so your melody, especially in an improvisation setting, sets the tone for all of those things, right? Wide intervals in your melody. Boo, wee, ha, ha, ho, ha, he. That's a very different kind of sound than ba-da-ba-da-ba-da-ba-da-ba-da-ba-da, right? These are two very different kinds of sounding melodies. And they set the scene for the way I might improvise. Or maybe they tell me I'm going to improvise differently to create contrast with the melody. But either way, it is the thing that establishes the vibe of the melodic nature of what comes next. Now, this is something that I really work hard on. I think more than anything else, it's the thing that after my first draft of a song, I go back over and go, am I still convinced by this melody? Is it still doing the things that I want it to do? Is it still communicating what I thought it was when I started writing it? And maybe it's changed over the course of the process, which again is okay, but I at least need to acknowledge that and adjust to fit that. Maybe my chord changes can be more interesting now that I've settled into a melody that I like, and the goal now changes. The melody is still the important thing, and I need to make it sound good. So I want to serve that purpose. Okay, so the second seed, and again, if you have any thoughts or comments on this stuff, please just feel free to put it in the chat. The melody is such a great place to start, but I also love the idea of just starting with harmonic ideas, and whether that means a chord progression or something as simple as just two chords back and forth. Um, Something to sort of help get me into the flavor of sound that I'm looking for, and also something that I want to commit to paper to frame my melody. So again, in the same way that if I start with the melody, that reduces my harmonic choices. If I start with the harmony, it starts to reduce my melodic choices, right? It doesn't now I'm not dealing with the chromatic scale of options. I'm dealing with maybe the major scale or a minor scale or something that is a little bit more manageable in terms of number of note choices. And because of chords, we immediately know 3 or 4 or maybe 5 notes that are going to be really strong from a melodic perspective, right? That especially those thirds and sevenths create so much color in terms of melody that my little bit of musical theory combined with what I put on paper for a chord symbol can get me a lot of stuff and still leave me a lot of freedom, right? I think also it's much easier to create an obvious sense of contrast with harmony, right? That when you're writing a melody, uh, you have to be a little bit more intentional to say, how do I create contrast, right? It may not be so obvious what is the thing that contrasts to what you've created, right? Whereas if I write down, I'll use one of Kareem's tunes as an example. If I write down B flat minor 7 to E flat 7, alternating back and forth, well, guess what? And I do that long enough, I need something to create some tension. So we have like basically like a 2-5 in E flat and A flat major, or you can think of it as like a 1-4 in B flat minor. But how does he break it up? With a big old 5 chord with a sharp 9, right? So we immediately leave the 4-note chord zone and open into the 5-note chord zone. We go from no alterations to a big, very obvious alteration. And we go from 2 chords, one that is our home base and one that is, we think of the subtonic, the subdominant, a place that isn't fully away from home, that still we could go 1-4, 1-4, 1-4, 1-4 indefinitely and not have to feel like we left that home zone of harmony. But the minute we hear a big dominant, we feel that shift, right? We feel a sense of, oh, we went away, so that we can establish coming back. So that's just a simple example of like why we, even in a blues, why we need the 4 chord, why we need that chord in the 5th bar of a blues to be what it is. It creates contrast. And if there's not enough contrast in what that chord is, or you want to make more contrast, that's the place to do it, right? That's the place where you leave home and now you have the opportunity to make it more different from what you've already written down. Yeah, you want to add to that, Kareem?
I would say I agree with everything that you're saying. And no, I don't want to muddy the waters here, but I would say you can also, and maybe we can speak to this a little bit, just on a song with like 1 chord or very simple rhythms, things that come to mind, like Miles Davis's "So What," where it's just 2 chords back and forth, or taking it a step further and take like McCoy Tyner's "Passion Dance," where the melody clearly has 2 different harmonic sections, but when they improvise, they're improvising just on one big F7 chord, but it's the way that they improvise that in their melodic construction of solos or sentences, if you will. They're playing with dissonance and consonants back and forth, but it's how they're composing in real time as soloists instead of just playing F7, 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 F7. So there's ways to do that on the flip side of it, even over a very simple harmonic form. But
absolutely. And when we get to the end and wrap it up, I'm going to have for those of you that are still listening at the end, some really good beginning things to start using very, very little information. Like if you're a first year on your instrument and you only know 1 major scale, you can still get started doing this today. Okay. Yeah. And I think that's that, please wait until, another 20 minutes or so when we get to that sort of wrap up, because I'm going to give you some specific ways to implement all of these concepts that we're talking about to just get going right away and put pencil to paper in the next 15 minutes after this session is over and have a seed at the very least for your composition.
Yeah, and David, I'm going to shut up and get out of the way because I've got to leave like right at for a meeting. So
we're going to be right. We'll be right on time. Don't worry about that. So rhythm, I think when we're talking about composing, that you can start with just composing using rhythm, and I think it's important also to think that the rhythm that we're talking about doesn't just have to be the rhythm of your melody, right? When we think of here's the rhythm of, that's the rhythm of the melody of confirmation. That's a pretty busy rhythm. Ta 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 ta. Simple rhythm, all the things you are, right? And to Kareem and I, these are like, they just pop right out. We can hear the melodies along with these rhythms because these melodic rhythms are so unique. But they don't have to be that. They can be the harmonic rhythm. It can be the idea that I want to just have it go chord 2, 3, 4, chord 2, 3, 4, third chord for 2 bars, chord 2 3 4, chord 2 3 4, chord 2 3 4, and another bar. So chord, chord, chord for 2 bars, chord, chord, chord for 2 bars. That's a really great way to start your composition and putting pencil to paper and still not have a lot of detail, right? Again, this is going to lead you into some choices for your harmony or your melody, or maybe it's the accompaniment rhythm. If you're somebody who's like makes beats, is in like the hip hop world or the EDM music world or any of that kind of stuff, you're probably starting with this. The T-Pain, a great producer, he streams often on Twitch. You can watch him make beats all the time. And it starts with the drum pads on his keyboard. It starts with hi-hats and bass drums and those kinds of things, and letting that start to dictate where everything else comes from. Again, I think of a lot of what we do is sort of like a pyramid, a process that whatever goes up here, we start to sort of go down to the bottom with having, more and more things to flesh out. But at the same time, it takes more and more shape, right? As we reach the base of that pyramid, it gets bigger and broader. But thinking like a drummer in any way, shape, or form, just with tapping, tapping, tapping. Maybe you have a drum pad. Maybe you have something digital that works good for you. But just starting with the sense of rhythm and putting that to paper. You can add your notes to it later. You can add anything to that rhythm later and dictate what it is. Maybe that's the rhythm for the bass line, right? Maybe it needs to go doom 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 da 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 da. Well, that could be my bass line. Boom 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 boom. It could be my melody. Be da da, bo doo doo be dee da da. Right? It can be any of the things that you need it to be, but that becomes again a focusing point, a point that now everything else can trickle down from. So to me, these are sort of these are the three main pieces of any piece of music. You invest your time in any one of them, and you're going to come up with something good. You invest in all three of these aspects of your composition and you'll have something really good because it'll be satisfying on all three of the levels that music and composing exists. Now, the Seedlings part of this conversation or discussion rather is to me a little bit more interesting in that it helps us get to a little bit more abstract ideas. Similarly, it kind of gets us some of the way there and eliminates some choices, but it isn't as concrete as writing down a rhythm or a melody or even a set of chords. And I think starting with a form in your mind of some kind can be really helpful. And maybe regardless of what style of music it is that you're composing in, borrowing from some other thing, whether that's a form of a tune that you really like in the jazz world, or maybe it's a tune you like in the pop world. We kind of have different terminologies for forms, right? If you're talking about pop songs, you're talking about verses and choruses and breakdowns and pre-choruses and these sorts of things. We don't really ever talk about that in the jazz world, right? We're talking about AABA or ABAC, or we're talking things like that. And that's also similar to classical forms or even larger classical forms like, concerto form, where you have this sort of opening exposition and a big development and then sort of a big recapitulation. Anything can be helpful. The shortest of short forms, I think, are really helpful too. A blues or an 8-bar blues or just something as simple as an 8-bar form that you really like. I know a lot of people get a lot of mileage out of the 8-bar blues, right? The idea that it's much more simple and manageable. That 12 bars from a phrasing standpoint isn't everybody's cup of tea. I get that. And having it be 2 4-bar phrases, it seems to get a lot of people kind of, oh, I get this a little bit more. This relates to my general listening habits, if I'm maybe not versed in the traditional world of blues. But I like using form to kind of get me going. And sometimes that form is coming from this sort of next area of sort of seedling issue, and that's concept. That sometimes my concept for a song can help dictate the form, and then that gets me going on my melody or my harmony. Now, when I'm talking about concept, I think there's a lot of different things here, and again, purpose is also down the line, and that's a little different. Concept for me can be any kind of abstract description. It can be that I want it to sound happy or sad, or it can be I want it to, be blue or purple or peppermint, right? Like it doesn't have to be something specific. I think story and drama are really helpful in thinking about. Like, I want this to feel like a spaghetti western. I want this to feel like um, a fight. I want this to feel. I remember doing a concert once when I was trying to quit smoking, and I did a thing called withdrawal, and I really wanted to try to mimic the feelings of what does it feel to withdraw musically. And so I think that's helpful. I think evoking somebody that you love and respect musically, or an homage to somebody, is a great, like, I know I want this to feel like 1950s Horace Silver. I know I want this to feel like Albert Eiler kind of vibe. I know I want this to sound like 1970s Stevie Wonder. Whatever that is a really helpful focusing agent in composing. Again, no details, but it definitely starts to hone you in onto what those details might look like. This is sort of I'm taking just pieces of the block of marble that I'm sculpting, and I'm just getting the big junk out of the way. I'm still left with a mess that doesn't look like anything yet, but I've gotten it closer to something specific, whatever that will end up being.
Yeah.
And I personally love this. I almost always try to start with something like that. I think the title is sort of an extension of that concept, even though titles generally are a little bit more specific. But again, I know that Kareem, you have written a ton of pieces that you have that are depicting places around Tacoma, Washington.
Yeah.
That to me does all of these things on this list, right? It drives what the melody and harmony and rhythm are going to be. It drives the growth of those things. It focuses your creative juices, right? Because now you can put pictures on the wall. You can do all kinds of things to help keep you inspired about that thing. And it also gives you, I'm closing my eyes. It gives you a cinematic view of this abstract thing. It gives you a very visual picture of what you're trying to paint musically, which again is a real abstract concept. But at the very least, it's now part of the zeitgeist of what you're doing, if you will.
Yeah, I would say too, just to jump in and add. Also, I mean, there are many times I'll give songs different titles because depending on the project and what it is, I mean, that's a whole other topic of conversation. But sometimes I'll have a piece and maybe it takes me a year or two to find a title that really fits, even though, I might write a song and there's nothing. And someone will say, well, it means this thing to one person. Will say, oh, this made me think of this. Or another person will say, oh, this made me think of this. Totally different thing. So when you have a definitive title, like if you're writing a song about a particular subject, give it a title that'll help the listener know, have some sort of context as to what they're listening to, as instead of it just being some nebulous thing,
And we'll to that, we're going to do a whole session on why context is so important, especially in jazz and classical music composition and arranging, because you don't have words to convey your meaning, and the few words that you do have, the title, are where you do it. And if you're lucky enough to have time on a microphone introducing your song, then maybe you can tell a little story and give more context to paint that picture. But I think again that you can be really you can make your song more successful with a great title that helps convey what you want the listener to experience when they hear your song. And that leads us sort of into the next and kind of final stage of this. And that is the purpose of your song, and having a very clear idea of why this song exists? What is its reason for being, right? Why are you writing it? Is it to express a certain emotion? Is it, again, back to the concept, is it about telling a story? Is it about evoking an image of a place? Is it just to make the people pat their feet and feel good? Or maybe not feel good. Maybe the intent is to make them feel tension so that the next song is the one that you use to make them feel good.
Yeah.
I put here at the bottom, functional role in your set or in your band. When at the very beginning of my career in the band that I had with my brother, um, I wrote a lot of music from that particular perspective. I knew we need a tune that does this. We need an up tempo, blah blah blah. We need a bluesy, funky, blue notey kind of thing. We need a feature a ballad for Tom. We need a feature ballad for me. We need something that's sort of slow and moody. We had these very specific goals in mind when I would sit down to write, and also I would also go, okay, well, if it's going to be this thing, then what's the thing that gets me excited from a creative juices thing? Was it, for me, it was, the Stanley Kubrick. So I wrote a bunch of tunes related to Stanley Kubrick movies, and Dedicated to The Shining was one on my first record. And, um, things that people said and phrases. And I remember Jeff Harper coined the phrase schizophrenic warfare, and that became a tune. um, but again, then those things now are like, well, what is it going to do for us when we play it? And thankfully having that outlet to play the music that you write, this is a big part of it.
Yeah.
To get it heard and played by the people that you're writing it for is the most important part of this process. And so, you know, whatever means you have to do that, and there will be more classes on ways in which you can do that more easily, with some free software and minimal tools, and we'll help you get going with that stuff. But again, I feel like saying to yourself, why am I writing this piece? And even more importantly, the middle thing on that list, what do I want the audience to experience when they hear this song? Now, again, the title really helps serve that, but so do all your other decisions, right? Your melody, your harmony, your rhythm. If you want them to feel a certain way, then some of the options for all of those things start to dwindle off the table, right? The more choices you make, the less choices you have as you go further down the line, right? If you've written a 32 bar composition and you were like, I wanted this to be happy, but it sounds sad, you're going to have to change a lot. You're going to have to change the harmony and your melody, and maybe even some of the rhythms of what you've written already, right? So having these things in mind is super helpful. And again, it's all these things, all of these seedling area umbrella ideas, they give context to the melody. They give context to the harmony. They give all of these things their context, even if it's only for you as the composer and the audience never learns those things. It's getting invested into the music as you write it.
Yeah.
Okay, so as we kind of have now wrapped up all of the sort of the 7 bullet points of how you can get started, here are some sort of final general thoughts on getting yourself started. In my mind, contrast equals energy, and it also equals drama. It moves the song forward when you add contrast in, and therefore that creates interest and drama. A song without contrast is a boring song that has no energy and therefore no drama. So it has to somehow get created elsewhere. Now, again, that might very well be the intention of your composition, to have a melody and song that starts out very low drama, so that the solos and the improvisation and what you do with the chords and the form and everything but the melody is what creates that contrast. But then that has to do it, right? You have to do that when you play that song. And now that has to be communicated somehow on the piece of paper that you write down, right? Solos need to be dramatic. So solos should be full of energy, or at the very least, there needs to be high points in the performance because the melody will never be that, right?
Yeah.
Similarly, you have a real long, busy melody, and then go right into real busy solos. That's problematic too, right? It's just, the listener is just going to be bombarded with too much information to take in.
Yeah.
So to me, it's about that sense of finding ways to create contrast in what you write, and that also helps create balance, right? Um, Start small, okay? If you're talking about writing melodies or chord progressions, a simple two phrases, a phrase of melody, a two bar, one chord, and then another one after it that you really, really, really like.
So for people that don't know what you're talking about, David, I think a good example would be like Bill Evans's "Peace Piece" off
No, no,
"Everybody
no,
Make
no, no,
It
no,
Go
no,
Up."
no, 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 no,
No,
no. I don't want to talk
no.
about any of those kinds of things.
Okay, all right, fair enough.
Whatever knowledge you have is where you should start. So if your only knowledge is two major scales, then that is what you should use. Right. I don't want to give you any kind of context for what you should listen to start
Mm,
composing, because it should come from you. It should come from
gotcha.
your brain and your idea of what that should be. You've probably listened to music if you're listening to this conversation. You have heard some music in your life. So you have some musical context for what a good song probably sounds like.
Gotcha.
Use that context. And if you're 12 years old and you're in beginning band, then use the context of that to write something that fits into the ilk of what you're already playing. If you are a seasoned veteran and you have more and more capabilities, then obviously your knowledge of harmony and theory is going to allow you to have a lot more possibilities. But it doesn't need to be anything more than that. One chord for one measure, another chord for another measure. They can be completely related, they can be completely unrelated. You could literally roll some dice and pick the chords based on the dice. And then now you have a harmony. You can now begin writing a melody to go with that harmony. Your choices are now limited because you have chosen a harmony to use. And therefore, it becomes much easier. You can practice improvising over and over and over those two chords until you play something that you feel like, "Oh, I like that. That's strong." And I think that's the other, one other thing to keep in mind when it comes to composing versus improvising. And this is why I have put "it takes what it takes" at the end. Um, as a composer, you have the ability to take those ideas that maybe as an improviser, you only have a tenth of a second to think about, and you have as long as you want to think about it. You can labor over that melody for a month until you think it's perfect. There is no rush and there is no deadline when it comes to composing. Now, obviously, if you're a working musician, maybe you've had deadlines where you had to do that. I certainly do. But the more you let it find where it needs to be done, and where you're satisfied with what it is, then it's done. But if you're not, if you're like, it's still missing something, then cool, keep working on it. And maybe that doesn't mean work on it right now. Stick it in the drawer and come back to it later. I studied composition with a guy named William O. Smith, also known as Bill Smith, at the University of Washington. And he would walk around campus with a little pocket notebook of music paper and write little 2-bar melodies and 4-bar melodies or 12-tone rows. And he would put them up on a bulletin board, and sometimes 4 or 5 of those things would coalesce together and be related, and sometimes they would stay up there and never have anything happen to them. But he was always actively composing something and putting more ideas to paper. And I think at the end of the day, that is what you have to do to be a better composer. You have to write more, and you have to do it as a practice. If we were talking about being a writer of words, it would be, you need to write something every day. You need to get an artist journal. You need to practice, have writing prompts, and you have to do all of those kinds of things.
Yeah.
That's to me, the same thing that we do as instrumentalists on our various instruments. You have got to practice every day, and play your instrument and dig deeper. And you also, as a composer, if you're trying to get better at it, you have to do it on a regular basis, and you have to have a way to evaluate that progress over time. And so to me, completing compositions, taking an idea that maybe was a month ago and went on a bulletin board, and saying, well, okay, let's try and make this into something final. Let's go play it on a gig. Let's go do whatever. Let's see what it sounds like. Let's see how it works. And now maybe you go back and edit it and make it into something better, different, whatever, after that. And it becomes something new. But at the end of the day, you writing and not ever hearing it and having it played, and also not ever finishing it, you will never get better. So start small so that you can finish things and then make something bigger, right? If writing a 32 bar song is too much, again, go back to that. I'm just going to write an 8 bar blues, a 12 bar blues, something small, maybe a 4 bar vamp, and that's it, and it's just going to happen 4 times, and I'm going to have a melody happen twice, and then it maybe a different melody over the third 4 bars, and then back to the first melody. And I only had to write 8 bars of melody, but I got a 16 measure song. There's a lot of ways you can start with very little and scale it into something that can be quote unquote finalized, so you can go play it. And I think, Kareem and I, we play under our own names. We play as sidemen. I don't know many people that aren't interested in playing some new music. So, if you have people that you play with, or even rehearse with on a regular basis, bring some stuff, try it out. If it sucks, at least you have a place to work from.
Yeah. I would say too, I mean, doing this whole process, it's going to, my opinions about this, but it's going to also better inform your improvising, because it's the same thing. It's just, you have, like you said, you have a fraction of a second in real time to transcribe what your ear is telling you on the bandstand. But the more and more you work on refining these musical sentences, it's going to help both your composition and your improvising. So
yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that we didn't talk about, and this relates to kind of 2 of the pieces of the puzzle that we talked about today, both using an existing form and using an existing harmony potentially, will lead us into the thing we'll talk about in our next session, which is a sort of a 4-way. I guess a diamond pattern makes more sense than a square in this, where we take an original piece of music that we really like, and that from that we derive 2 things, a contrafact and a reharmonization. And that at that point we can then write a new composition based on our reharmonization. So we can come out with 2 new pieces of music and potentially a third way of playing another piece of music from one song. And this is something that Kareem will can speak to. If you have not listened to his regular streams, you have heard this. If you should have heard this word before on Kareem's streams. It is used often, coined by the great David Baker. It's one of the great academic words in the jazz world. It just means we're writing a new melody on an existing set of chord changes from someone else's song. A reharmonization is just a really crafty word of saying we're going to take a song that we really like and we're going to just get rid of the chords and put in new ones. A great thing that you can do with any song that you like to give it some new life. But we're going to be addressing it in the context of both composing and arranging in our next session, because contrafacts and the act of writing a contrafact is sort of starting with half of your information decided for you. It's a very helpful focusing tool. It also takes away a lot of decisions. You don't have to think about the form anymore, and you don't have to think about the harmony or the rhythmic the rhythmic aspect of the harmony anymore. You really just have it's sort of like paint by numbers, if you will. You can paint, you can use whatever colors you want on a paint by numbers. You can absolutely follow the instructions, but if you want to make it into something different and unique in your own, you throw that out the window and you go, well, you know what? I'm going to paint all the 2s purple instead of gray. And now my painting is going to look totally different. that's kind of what a contrafact and a reharmonization are for that matter. They're just sort of different versions of of that process. And so if you're new to composing and starting with writing your own melody with zero information on a piece of paper is still something that you're struggling with, our second session kind of gets you halfway down the road right out of the gate. And it also gives you a way to come up with a second composition as well as another way to play that old composition that you like. So it's a 3-for-1 at the end of the day. If you're a performer and you like to play all the things you are, we're going to show you how to come up with 3 songs of your own, or sorry, 2 songs of your own and a reharmonization, which will certainly make it sound like your own, from that one song. And that will be the kind of the focus of our next session.
Cool. Well, David, thank you so much for your time today. Thank you for everybody
Yeah.
who's joining us online in real time and also after the fact. And as I said, if you have any questions about stuff we've been discussing today, throw them in the comments and we'll do our best to get back to them as fast as we can. I believe, let me check the calendar here. When is our next thing scheduled for? Have we even scheduled it yet? It may not.
It's May 21st, I believe. It's a Sunday in May.
That
Third
would be
weekend in May.
22nd.
22nd, that's the one.
Yeah, and we'll figure out the exact time for that. Let's see, what else do I want to say? If you find value in these videos that we're doing, like I said, they're all free and open to the public. Feel free to support us by making a donation online. You can do that via Venmo or PayPal or mail a check. The information's at the beginning of this post. What else do I want to tell you? David's information is right there on the screen too. If you need to contact him or reach out, please do so.
Please do.
An arranger. So the next one will be next month. And if you want to get more information, feel free to jump on our email list. You can join that at, you can email me directly at kareemkandi@hotmail.com, or you can find the information on our website, which is www.kkworldorchestra.org. What else is coming up? Sunday, we're doing a concert with the great Brazilian pianist and composer Cassio Viana here in Tacoma at the Spanish Ballroom. I think that's the next thing. There's a bunch of stuff coming up. Just check the calendar online or reach out if you need more information. It's been a pleasure doing this. And David, thank you so much. We'll see you again soon.
Sounds great. Looking forward to the next one.
All right, me too. Take care.